Welcome to the Exam Room Live, brought to you by the Physicians Committee. Hi, I am the weight loss champion, Chuck Carroll, and this is the healthiest half hour anywhere online today. Appreciate you joining us right here on Facebook and on YouTube. And today, we are going to truly be learning about the power of food. We're going to be doing a head-to-head kind of comparison of menu versus medication for treating diabetes. Dr. Carolyn Trapp will be here with us to walk us through it. You know, this is really interesting, important stuff, especially given how many of us actually have diabetes. Dr. Trapp, I'm looking forward to speaking with you in just a moment. Appreciate you taking the time today.
Thanks, Chuck. I'm happy to be here with you.
And I'm happy you're also going to be sticking around to take questions as well when we open up the doctor's mailbag. So go ahead and post yours in the comments section now, or you can tweet them to us at Chuck Carroll WLC or at PCRM. Just make sure that you use that hashtag Exam Room Live. But first, here are your health headlines for Thursday, August 27th, 2020. Leading off with a look at the latest on the coronavirus. In the U.S., nearly 45,000 new cases were reported Wednesday, pushing the total for the pandemic now beyond 5.8 million, and 1,200 more lives were lost yesterday as the total there closes in on 180,000. But infection rates over the last week now rising in just a handful of states, a number that is likely to continue to fall after the CDC revised guidelines calling for fewer people to be tested. The agency now says asymptomatic people can skip testing even if they've come into contact with someone who is known to have tested positive. Many leading infectious disease experts disagree with the change. The love of your life could help you live a longer and healthier life. Wouldn't that be nice? New research shows that spouses who want to lose weight do better when they do so together. These are the findings of the European Society of Cardiology, which studied weight loss among heart attack survivors. The study finds people are more than 2.5 times as likely to lose weight when they do it with their partner. The study also finds a higher likelihood of quitting smoking and exercising more when couples work in tandem. And finally, this is interesting. Could vitamin C be the key to maintaining muscle as we get older? A study examining the diets of more than 13,000 people between the ages of 42 and 82 finds those who consumed the most vitamin C had the greatest amount of muscle. Researchers of the peer-reviewed English study also found more than half of middle-aged and senior-aged adults are not getting enough of it in their daily diet. One researcher concluding, quote, "We're not talking about people needing mega doses here. Eating an orange and having vegetables with the meal will be sufficient for most people." And yeah, one orange will get you there. So too will one cup of chopped broccoli. So many people sleep on broccoli, the fact that it's a lean green vitamin C machine. So is kale and strawberries and red peppers. Those are powerhouses as well, you know? I could spend all day talking about nutrient values. I have this app on my phone. I'm just nutty about it. I love it so much. But we got to move on. We got a lot to do on the show here today. So someone else who has devoted much of her life to the power of food is Dr. Carolyn Trapp. And she is an expert on diabetes, and a much needed one at that, as more than 34 million Americans now are living with type 2 diabetes, and nearly 90 million others have prediabetes. But experts say they don't have to live that way, and I'm pretty sure Dr. Trapp would agree with that assessment. Dr. Trapp, welcome to the Exam Room Live. Appreciate you being here.
Thank you so much, Chuck. I'm happy to be here. You know, as you're talking about eating oranges, I'm thinking that for so long, people who have diabetes have been told they should stay away from fruit, you know, that's problematic. And fortunately, we now know that fruit is, yeah, it's got a little bit of sugar in it, but it's natural sugar in a package of fiber and vitamins and minerals, and we need fruit. We know that people who eat fruit are more likely to live longer. And even people who have diabetes, maybe especially people with diabetes, should be including fruit in their diet.
Yeah, well, let's start there because this is such a great talking point. How does the body treat the naturally occurring sugars found in fruit different than the sugar that you get in, say, I don't know, a donut?
Sure. So, you know, I think the magic word here is fiber. And when we're eating fruit in the form that nature provided it to us, we're getting all this fiber, which slows the digestion of the fruit, and our body can handle it better. I had this experience when I first started prescribing a plant-based diet to patients. I remember getting a panic phone call from a patient who had a healthy breakfast, oatmeal with a cup of blueberries on top of it. And he called me at lunchtime and he said, my blood sugar is over 200. What should I do? And I was new to this. I mean, this was probably 13 years ago. And I was a little nervous, but I knew this patient. I knew what else, was in his medical history. And I felt safe saying to him, let's just keep an eye on it. Drink some water, go for a walk, and why don't you check your blood sugar later today and let's see what happens. And sure enough, his blood sugar came down. And over the next couple of days, that was the pattern. And I've seen this over and over with people. The majority of people who shift from a high fat diet, a meaty diet, or a high processed food diet to a low fat, they're not adding a lot of oil to their diet, and they're eating whole foods and fruits and vegetables, generally see blood sugars come down. It may be a couple days, it may be a couple weeks. For a small percentage of people will initially see blood sugar go up, but over time, it's so effective. It's a great way to treat diabetes.
I know a lot of
really
people in the
medicine.
A lot of people in the chat room are already asking about specific fruits, so we'll get to those when we open up the doctor's mailbag. So that I love this conversation so much. But I'm curious because as I'm introducing you, I mentioned that there are 34 million Americans now with diabetes, and we also know that the prevalence of obesity is continuing to rise. And so I'm curious, what is the current rate or the current trend, I should say, for diabetes? Is that rising right along with the obesity rate?
Well, the numbers are definitely continuing to go up. Unfortunately, diabetes is an epidemic in this country. As you have shared with listeners, people who have diabetes are at more risk of having bad outcomes if they develop COVID-19. So it's never been more important to address this underlying disease and prevent it in the first place. I think we see across the lifespan, we have a high rate of diabetes among older adults, but now it's occurring in younger and younger people. And in fact, I met a cardiologist a few years ago who had to do bypass surgery on a child under age 10 who had type 2 diabetes.
Wow.
And you have to have diabetes for a few years before you develop significant complications and uncontrolled diabetes for several years. So the fact that we're now seeing type 2 diabetes in adolescents and children shows that this really is a significant problem for us as a society. The costs, the economic cost, the cost to our workforce, the cost to individuals of what it means of a shortened life expectancy and also greater morbidity, a life that's spent with these complications if we don't turn this around. And we have the ability to do it. I feel like what I learned in school has not served me well. I learned a lot about counting carbohydrates, and now all of that just goes out the window. What Dr. Barnard's team's research has shown was that carbohydrates are our friends, but we have to be selective in which carbohydrates. And I'd mentioned, I'm sorry, the dog who is sharing my office space today. What we've learned, I'm on the phone. I'm on a radio show. Please go out with the dog. I'm so sorry. I didn't put a sign on the window.
Live media, everybody. It's all good.
Here with me. Yep. So anyway, I was talking about my favorite word, fiber.
Yeah.
And that we now know that instead of focusing on carbohydrates, I would love to shift the focus to fiber. Let's make sure everybody's getting enough fiber in their diet. And what the Physicians Committee has recommended is 40 grams of fiber a day. And most Americans get closer to 10 or 15 grams of fiber a day. You know, if you're eating several pieces of fruit, a cup and a half of beans, whole grains, whole grain pasta, intact grains like barley, brown rice, those are all foods. Oats are a favorite. Those are all foods that are high in fiber. And when people who have high blood sugar shift to a diet that's made up of these foods and are getting that 40 grams of fiber, all of a sudden their blood sugars will come down.
I I want to go back. I need to ask you about that 10-year-old with diabetes, younger than 10, who had bypass surgery at such a young age. What else can you tell us about that case? I mean, that to me is it's just heartbreaking to hear that a child under 10,
Yeah.
had to have the surgery. Was that all diet driven? Were there other factors at
Well,
play here?
yeah, so I know just a little bit about the case because it was shared with me by a cardiologist working with the Navajo Nation.
Hmm.
And where, as you know, Chuck, I have been working with Physicians Committee for the last decade to address diabetes. Native Americans have the highest rates of diabetes in the US. Something like 16% of the population is compared to 10% of the overall population. And with some Native nations, the rates are as high as 35% of adults have type 2 diabetes. And for this specific child, I am sure it was diet driven. And, you know, just what I've seen of and what I've been taught about how diet has changed for Native Americans. You know, I know I had this impression of Native Americans as hunters and, you know, eating buffalo and a lot of wild game, and that was a big part of their diet. And for some tribes, hunting was and continues to be part of the diet. But for many Native Americans who were driven off their land and came to rely on commodity foods provided by the US government through to today, they received canned meats, blocks of cheese, powdered milk, a big block of lard. Until recently, about 10 years ago, lard was removed from the commodities. But they were given foods that were certainly not traditional foods and foods that they came to rely on. And as we all know, that if you're eating a lot of fat, you become accustomed to liking the feeling you get from eating more fat. And it also, I think, numbs our taste buds to healthier foods. You know, we can lose our enjoyment of a delicious apple or the deliciousness in fresh vegetables when we're eating all this greasy fat. So we have families, Native Americans, who've come to rely on these commodity foods. Also, what foods are available to Native Americans on the Navajo Nation, which covers parts of Arizona, New Mexico, and Utah. There are very few full-service grocery stores, and many people buy their groceries from these little convenience stores. And what keeps, you know, it's foods in packages. So again, canned meats, junky snack food, things that are not healthy. And we see people building their diets around that. So our work has been around helping people learn about the power of food and creating a demand for healthy foods. And then there are a lot of initiatives on the Navajo Nation to grow foods. And so together we've been partnering. We want to create a demand. We also want to help teach people how to cook foods. You know, beans are a traditional native food. Beans were grown throughout the Americas. Unfortunately, many Americans and many Native Americans are no longer cooking beans on a daily basis and have lost that knowledge of how to cook beans. So we've been reintroducing them. And, I've been struck by my patients in Michigan tell me, oh, I can't tolerate beans. Native Americans I've been working with in Arizona and New Mexico say, I can't tolerate beans. And wherever you are, whatever your background, it's not that you can't tolerate them. It's that if you haven't been eating them, your gut doesn't have the bacteria anymore to break them down. But the good news is when you start eating these foods, our guts are amazingly adaptive, and they will start to be able to digest beans. And it's so important to do this, to incorporate those foods in your diet. So I always say, start with small quantities, fully cook your beans, soak them first, and then rinse them really well before you cook them, and give yourself time to adjust to eating them. And I promise your system will adjust, and you'll come to be able to eat beans without suffering at all. And it's totally worth making the effort.
Well, let me ask you this: compared to the traditional medical route or medicinal route that so many diabetics use here, if people would instead focus on changing their diet instead of relying exclusively on medication, what would the difference be in the outcome of these cases? Right now, we see 34 million Americans with diabetes. How much would that number decline if the focus was put on food?
Chuck, I don't know how to begin to estimate the numbers. I know what I saw in my own practice and what I've seen throughout the US with people who participate in the Physicians Committee's Food for Life classes, in our work in Indian country, in lots of places where people change their diet. We see that often it's possible to turn this around. So let me share two ideas. One is sort of the underlying process of diabetes, and the other is the limits of medication. So first of all, in terms of the underlying process, in people who have type 1 diabetes, they are not making insulin. It's an autoimmune disease. Their pancreas, the beta cells of the pancreas, are no longer able to make insulin, and they rely on insulin in order to metabolize food and to keep a normal blood sugar. And for people with type 1, even with the diet change, they will continue to need insulin, although we know that even people with type 1, when they adopt a healthy plant-based diet, often they can greatly reduce the amount of insulin they need. So worth doing. For people who have type 2 diabetes, their underlying problem generally is not making insulin, it's using insulin. The underlying problem is one of insulin resistance. Their muscle cells are resistant to insulin and therefore can't pull the sugar out of the bloodstream and use it for fuel. That sugar stays in the bloodstream where it causes problems. It adheres to red blood cells, and then as those red blood cells travel around the body through little tiny blood vessels, those fat, sticky red blood cells cause damage. When people change to a plant-based diet and get all the meat and all the fat that's in chicken and fish and beef out of their diet, they're no longer causing insulin resistance. And now the sugar that they eat in the form of an apple or potato, their body is now able to metabolize it. It's not true for everybody with type 2 diabetes that they'll be able to eliminate all medication. I've had a small number of patients who really did what I thought was everything right, and we test and we find that they're just not making enough insulin anymore for their body's needs. And after many years of uncontrolled diabetes, that can happen. But I'm happy to say that's not true for the majority of people. And many people who make this change are able to greatly reduce or even eliminate medication. That brings me to my second point, and that is the limit of medications. So as a nurse practitioner, I had drug reps in my office daily who wanted to tell me about the latest and greatest medication. And if you look at ads for diabetes medications, you will see that they talk about that they lower blood sugar. But that's all they're really able to advertise that they do, with the exception of two classes of diabetes drugs, the two newest classes. But I'll save those for later. The majority of drugs for diabetes do nothing but lower A1C. And if lowering A1C prevented heart attacks or caused longer or led to a longer life, that would be great. But we now know the American College of Physicians in 2018 reported on this in their new guidelines for clinicians, that the majority, that lowering A1C with medication doesn't lead to what most people and probably most clinicians think. It only gives you better numbers. It doesn't lead to a longer life or reduce the risk of loss of eyesight or kidney disease or stroke or these other really significant complications. And that's a significant difference. With diet, we're getting at the underlying problem. We're getting lower numbers, not only lower blood sugar, but also lower blood pressure, lower cholesterol. And those are really important numbers to focus on. And that's why I love to help people shift to a healthy diet as opposed to just writing one prescription after another after another. I really thought I was doing my patients a favor when I was giving them a sample of an insulin pen in my office and showing them how to use insulin, because I knew it would give them better numbers right away. But I didn't appreciate the problems, the low blood sugar that came with more and more insulin, and the cost. It's been in headlines now for a long time. The cost of insulin has gone up by about 300% in the last 10 years. It's ridiculous. Insulin can be $400, $500, $600 for a month's supply now. And that's not going away anytime soon. And insulin's just one example. There are other medications for diabetes that run $600, $700, $800 for a month's supply. You can buy a lot of fruits and vegetables and beans and whole grains for that much money. Many people aren't aware of the cost because their insurance covers it, but they're having higher and higher co-pays. So really, as clinicians, I feel like it's our ethical responsibility to share this other option.
All right. You and I could go down this road all day. I agree with everything that you just said. And I love the fact that you just share that so eloquently and truthfully on the show. But let's set that aside for now, because we do have to open up the doctor's mailbag. A lot of great questions coming in right now. And this one, we were talking about fruits earlier in the show, talking specifically about oranges. Well, Butterfly Love, I love that name, at 1203 was wondering specifically about bananas. Are they okay for people with diabetes?
They are okay. I like to say, any fruit, as long as it's not dipped in chocolate, and even a little bit of chocolate, it's okay. Dean Ornish talks about having his little square of chocolate every day. So some foods have a higher glycemic index, specifically watermelon and pineapple, but you have to eat a lot of those even to raise blood sugar. So focus first on getting the animal foods out of the diet, focus on getting the oils out of the diet. And then if you're still having higher blood sugar, you may be somebody who does need to limit fruit. But I think I don't know that it's any specific fruit. It's maybe just the total quantity of fruit. But overall, I think that we can do better to focus on foods from animals because of their fat and cholesterol content, and oils because they're really, it's pure fat and it can raise insulin resistance. But those should really be the priorities.
Here's a great question from Kathy Hines. This one from 1205. She wants to know, why does blood sugar rise during sleep? That's an interesting one.
Oh, so that's a great question. Our blood sugar rises while we're sleeping because of the liver. Our liver works like a warehouse and it stores extra sugar in the form of glycogen. And in the early morning hours, our body's anticipating getting up, getting moving. We need some fuel. So the liver pumps out a little bit of sugar. In people who have type 2 diabetes, it can put out more sugar than we actually need and more than our body is able to process. So sometimes people will say to me, my blood sugar is too high in the morning. And I will always say, well, you have to look at the overall pattern. If you're a little bit high in the morning, and that should be a really individual number. For some people, it's above 100. For some people, 150 is okay. It really just depends on your age. It depends on your medical history and what you're using to get blood sugars down. So find out from your healthcare professional what your target should be. But in general, if it's a little high in the morning, but the rest of the day is okay, I'm usually not too worried. And I would want to look at the overall pattern. If there's still room for improvement in your diet, some people find having a snack at night brings their blood sugar down in the morning. Others find a snack at night makes it higher. So very individualized as to what a high morning blood sugar should be or when it's problematic.
Great question here from Amit on YouTube. Wants to know if brown rice is indeed better than white rice. That is the great debate for so many people.
Sure. So in Asia, they eat a lot of white rice. In the US, though, brown rice has more fiber. So for that reason, I would recommend it. Also, I wouldn't limit your grains to brown rice. I have come to love barley, quinoa. You all know about oatmeal, rolled oats or old-fashioned oats, and probably steel-cut oats, but oat groats, if you haven't tried them, are delicious. They're a more intact grain, and you just soak them overnight and then cook them in the morning for about 25 minutes. Or you can put them in a crock pot, and they're really hearty and filling and higher in fiber than any of the other oats.
All right. Liz on YouTube, when is the best time to test your glucose? Is it in the morning? Is it in the afternoon? Is it in the evening? When is the best time?
Yeah. So when to test is a really individualized thing. It depends on what medication you're taking and what you're testing for. So my priority is avoiding low blood sugar. Low blood sugar can be a really serious problem. People are hospitalized every year with low blood sugar. So if you're on medication that can cause low sugar and you're changing your diet, you want to work closely with your healthcare professional to ratchet back on your medication. If you're not taking insulin or a medication that can cause low sugar and you're just trying to catch high readings, I would encourage you to focus on your behaviors and not on your numbers. Are you spend more time in the kitchen chopping those vegetables, having healthy vegetables prepped in the fridge to make part of your meal, put on your sneakers, go for a walk. Those behaviors are really important. We tend to get super focused on these numbers. And I think that the trends are more important than any individual number. I also think focusing on blood pressure and cholesterol numbers, super important. Get those numbers down first. You can monitor your blood pressure at home, and blood pressure also responds really well to diet change, and blood pressure medications can become too strong. Lastly, in terms of when to test, you might try mixing it up a little bit. So look at what your sugars are in the morning, and once those are good, then maybe test it in the evening before bed to see what those numbers are. So work with your healthcare professional to get the guidance that you need about when you should be testing.
Great question here from Tansy on Facebook. Says in Hong Kong, doctors tell diabetes patients to cut sugar, but not meat and oil. So is sugar really the priority here?
I don't think that's true only in Hong Kong. I think we have doctors, well-meaning doctors and nurse practitioners, telling people to cut sugar. And, you have to look. Doctors, none of us are getting a lot of education in our professional colleges about diet and the benefits of cutting meat and cutting oil. So some of us have to educate our healthcare professionals about the power of diet. I love to refer healthcare professionals to our nutrition guide for clinicians app, and also nutritioncme.org are great places for healthcare professionals to learn about this. And then, of course, all of our conferences are also great places where you can hear from the researchers about the power of food. Um, if you're only telling people to cut sugar, you're not going to fix the underlying disease, and you're going to have to keep prescribing medications. And cutting sugar for some will work initially because maybe you're cutting out calories, but in the long run, it doesn't go far enough for most patients.
Final question comes to us from Autumn at 1227. She's wondering, do you think changing and eliminating wheat and gluten from her diet, specifically talking about flour there, will that help with diabetes?
It can for some people. So gluten sensitivity, so there's celiac disease. If you have celiac disease, yeah, definitely have to get rid of gluten. If you're sensitive to gluten, then eliminating meat certainly may make you feel better. You have to look at the form of wheat, though. So a food that we can have a whole wheat bread that can either be 100% whole wheat, and when you look at the label, you'll see it's got 3 grams or 4 grams of fiber per slice. That's a good choice. We also see whole wheat bread that has very little fiber. And how can that be? Because if you look at the ingredients, it's got whole wheat flour and also white flour. It's a mix. So it's not really giving you the benefit of the whole wheat. You're not getting all the fiber. So I really encourage you to read the labels, look for high fiber foods. And sure, if you want to experiment with setting aside wheat and see it, if you feel better, for some people that can be beneficial if you have a sensitivity.
All right. And Dr. Trapp, you are going to be participating in Dr. Barnard's Your Body in Balance Tackling Diabetes series. This is exciting. It's a 3-week series that kicks off on Wednesday night, September the 9th. It runs every Wednesday for 3 weeks, 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific. You're going to be sharing a lot more information during that class. I as much as you shared today, I can't even begin to imagine what you're going to drop on everybody that night.
Well, thanks, Chuck, for raising the expectations on that. I am delighted to be working with Dr. Barnard for those dates. And it's, I think, a great public service to be that we're offering this program. There will be wonderful information. And I want to encourage everybody who's listening to you today to invite their friends and families to participate, because who wants to be on medication for the rest of their lives? Knowledge is power, and we have some great information to share. I'll be sharing some of the experiences of my own patients, and we'll also be talking about really practical information, some great ideas for simple meals, and some recipes and other good resources.
Yeah, and here's the cool thing too. The cost of registration includes a copy of the book. So Dr. Barnard's latest book, Your Body in Balance, that will be shipped automatically to you once you sign up for that class. And you can do that by heading over to pcrm.org and heading to the events page. Sign up right there. Or click that link right there that we just put. Hey, look at you with the book. Okay. That is product placement at its finest. Look at you there. Okay.
I just have it right here.
Our wonderful producer also just dropped the link to register right there in the comment section. So go ahead and click on that and sign up, and you will not be disappointed. Dr. Trapp, thank you so very much for your time today. This has been a real treat.
Thank you, Chuck. Nice to talk to you.
All right. And a little housekeeping, a couple of questions that were asked. Jill and a couple other people were wondering about the apps that I use on my iPhone. Nutrients is a big one, and Foochgate. That is the other one. And Jane, no, I do not drink alcohol. So there you go. I hope that clears that up. If we didn't get to your questions today, have no fear. We will be saving them. We will jot them down. And I promise you, we will try to get you an answer on an upcoming episode. Speaking of which, Dr. Jim Loomis will be back on the show tomorrow. He will then be opening up the doctor's mailbag and busting out a whole bunch of answers for us as well. So that's noon Eastern right back here on Facebook and on YouTube tomorrow. And don't forget to sign up for that Tackling Diabetes event with Dr. Trapp and Dr. Barnard. That is one that you don't want to miss. And before we go, I got to tell you, I'm so excited about the new episode of the Exam Room podcast that came out today. So head over to Apple Podcast or Spotify, wherever you get your favorite shows from. Hit that subscribe button and please leave a healthy 5-star rating. We would appreciate that as well. Your reward for doing so today is unlearning unhealthy cooking habits. So often we're just brought up, it's ingrained in us to cook with oil or grab the butter out of the fridge and throw that in the pan and not even think about it, or throw salt on top of our food without even tasting it first. All of these habits are ingrained in us at such a young age. So as we get older and health problems start to creep up, how do we break these unhealthy habits? Chef Lauren Kretzer joined me today. She's got 5 wonderful tips to help us unlearn unhealthy cooking habits that will get you going on a healthier journey. It's also a great episode to share with someone who is brand new to plant-based diets and going SOS, as it were. Maybe you want to listen to this podcast when you're in the car with a friend or a family member and try to pique their interest a little bit. It's a great episode. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, wherever it is you get your shows from, just look for The Exam Room by the Physicians Committee. Hit that subscribe button and enjoy and soak up that information. All right. That is all the time that we have today. I want to thank the crew behind the scenes that makes this wonderful magic happen. And of course, to Dr. Carroll and Trapp for taking the time to join us as well. And on behalf of everyone here at the Physicians Committee, I am the weight loss champion, Chuck Carroll. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll talk to you again tomorrow. But until then, stay safe, take a stand, and keep it plant-based.